did we sign these over? It is 7 p.m., so we're calling to order this meeting of the Richfield Housing and Redevelopment Authority. Our first item is approval of the minutes of the regular HRA meeting of September 17th, 2018.
Move approval.
Second.
There's been a motion for approval and second. Are there any changes or corrections? Hearing none, all in favor of approving the minutes, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All right, we've approved the minutes. Next, we have approval of the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any changes? Hearing none, all in favor of approving the agenda, please say aye.
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 All opposed? All right, we've approved the agenda. The next item on the agenda is the consent calendar. Mr. Devich.
Thank you, Chair Supple, members of the HRA. The consent calendar, for those at home, those in the audience here, contains several separate items which are acted upon by the HRA in one motion. Once the consent calendar has been approved, the individual items and the recommended action will also have been approved and require no further action. Tonight, the several separate items kind of boil it down to one, item A. Consideration of the approval of the use of the Housing and Redevelopment Authority General Fund for one down payment assistance loan in the amount of $10,000. And that concludes tonight's consent calendar.
All right, is there a motion to approve the consent calendar?
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Are there any comments or discussion?
I would just say I'm happy we're moving forward with this, even though there's some movement on where it's going to happen in the future. So
Yeah,
thank you for still bringing this forward.
It's a great program.
Can we have the city managers kind of run through briefly some of the bullet points and what the criteria is?
I'm going to pass that over to Julie Urban, who knows that stuff right off the top of her head.
I'm looking more for eligibility, just in case somebody asks, or we can get the information out.
Sure. Actually, I'll let Kate, who administers the program, he'll go down
Asks
the
us
line.
any further than that, we're all not going to, that's not going to work.
So this program is for Richfield renters who are able to purchase homes in Richfield. And they have to meet income requirements, so they have to be under 80% of the area median income.
Which is?
For a family of four, it's around $72,000.
Okay.
And there's a number of other requirements in terms of the amount of housing debt they can take on. We don't want people to overmortgage themselves. We require that they work with the Minnesota Housing Approved Lender. They take a home stretch course. And then our money is $10,000 that they can use towards down payment, closing costs, things like that.
Do we have a fund, a renewable fund or something? I mean, what if we get 10 in a year?
Right now we have CDBG dollars
Okay.
set aside for it, so $50,000 budgeted. So that'd be 5 loans. And if we exceed that, we'll come back and ask you all what you want to do.
You know what? I really hope we do.
I hope so too.
Okay.
It'd be great if we get 5.
Great. Thank you.
All right, so all in favor of approving the consent calendar, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All right, we've approved the consent calendar. Next, we move on to consideration of the adoption of a resolution approving an inclusionary affordable housing policy. Mr. Devich.
Again, thank you, Chair Supple and members of the HRA. I'm going to ask Julie Urban to make this presentation.
Chair Supple, members of the HRA, in 2013, both the Richfield City Council and the Richfield Housing and Redevelopment Authority adopted a housing policy vision statement that supports a full range and balance of housing types that match the choices of its diverse residents. Furthermore, there have been many HRA discussions in the past 18 months related to continuing support for affordable housing. As a part of the implementation of the Housing Visioning Statement and in conformance with City Council direction, staff is recommending the adoption of a formal inclusionary affordable housing policy. A preliminary draft of this policy was presented to the City Council and Richfield HRA at a July 16th concurrent work session. Much of this policy has been consistently applied to developments receiving assistance from the city or the HRA over the past 20 years. A former policy, however, will better define expectations and requirements in a more transparent manner. The proposed policy would require housing developers receiving a public subsidy to either make at least 20% of all housing units to be affordable to either renters earning less than 60% of the area median income or owners earning less than 115% of the AMI, the area median income. Or they could alternately pledge 15% of the net present value of the subsidy they receive to the Housing and Redevelopment Fund. They must also provide us with a 90-day notice of sale. They must agree to not discriminate against renters receiving rental subsidies. And based on feedback from the City Council at their meeting on September 25th, the proposed policy has been revised to state that it is to be applied only for developments of 5 or more units. And then in the case of scattered site developments, for example, Richfield Rediscovered and our new home programs, the 20% affordability requirement shall be applied cumulatively over a 3-year period. And then, as I said, the City Council considered this back in September and did approve it with the provision that they would like to see us clarify that provision about what about our scattered site housing developments.
Can you clarify that more? When you say that over a 3-year period it has to be 20%, is that from any one developer or the whole program altogether?
So typically, the way we have run that program is that we seek out developments on individual basis. I mean, sometimes we'll have builders come in wanting to build more than one. We had the townhome project, for example, where 3 out of 5 were affordable, 2 were market rate. But generally, it's been on a scattered site, single property. And so over time, over the course since 1990, when we've had both programs operating, 23% of all of the units built were affordable at 80%. In the last 3 years, 25% have been affordable. So looking at the numbers, we've typically always kind of done that as we've gone along, just as a staff and policy level.
So you mean just who doesn't matter who the developers are, but in
Right.
total?
We're talking about looking at
Okay.
in total at the new home program, which we work with Habitat and the Land Trust and others to build through that, and then the market rate where it could be a variety of builders. So it's up to us to which is what we do through our budgeting process. When we come to you with a budget, there's a certain amount budgeted for Richfield Rediscovered and a certain amount for new home, and that's kind of always been your policy.
Mm-hmm.
And so we felt like that was a way to address the mayor's concerns, and he had pointed that out. You know, what do we do with that? You can't really split a house, one single house, so you have to look at it in a larger number, and that's what we're proposing that we do.
All right, are there other comments?
I'm still confused. I'm trying to figure out
Me too.
if we do single family homes, and just by way of example, because he's the gentleman most often in front of us, Mr. Enders, if he does 3 or 4, does one of them have to be affordable when he goes to his 3rd house or 4th house? I mean, we talk about 5. I think Mr. Stark indicated 5 units to do it. How, when we got single family homes, who takes the hit?
Yeah, I think we direct it through our internal process. Again, that's why we want to apply it over a longer period so we can kind of plan for it and think about it. So, for instance, if Mr. Andrus were to come with 4 market rate homes, we would know that we need to spend resources to identify an affordable single-family home through Habitat or through some other source. And it might be that in a year, Mr. Endrus builds 5 or 6 market rate homes. But again, we would retroactively look at the prior 3 years and make sure that the numbers balance. And if they don't, we could tell Mr. Endrus no on that basis to say, Destin, we looked at this over the last 3 years, and you've done a lot of market rate homes, and our ratio is off now because you've done so many, because we've collectively done so many, that it's time for either you or another builder to do an affordable single-family home to bring that ratio back into compliance.
I think that when we assign lots to either program, we would be controlling those numbers when we do that. We would say, well, we have 4 that we consider market rate, but you know what? We need to have that. We need to have one of those 4 be marketed as an affordable. And I think typically we prefer to work with Habitat, with the Land Trust and others, developers who are used to working and setting people up for successful home ownership, especially when you're on a limited income, because it's hard to be a homeowner.
Would it be possible then, rather than putting it on, whether it's a first-time person comes in and they happen to draw the lucky number, why don't we just specifically allocate that when we hit that or we're falling below our margins? Why don't we take the initiative and go find
Yes.
someone?
Exactly.
So let's place it on us rather than the single-family home that want to come in, and we don't want to discourage them from coming here, but
Right.
we want to keep this ratio, then let's put it on our shoulders to go out and find it.
Right, and so when we looked back at our numbers, we found that we have been doing that,
Okay.
and slightly above 20%
Well,
is
let's make it
kind
a
of,
policy then.
right, so then it's in the policy now. Yep,
Right,
and
okay.
so, yep.
Yeah, just so we understand that, so that, yeah.
We feel 100% confident in our ability to do this without hindering the market rate housing.
Right, and one other question on this, and I know that we talked about it at length, trying to figure out if the developer opts out on the 20% affordable and says, we'll pledge 15% of the net present value of the subsidy. Did we figure out how we're gonna figure that out? Because the net value of a subsidy, we don't even know that if it's tax increment until it's done.
No, we know. We have it
What it's gonna
projected.
be?
Yeah.
Okay,
We projected out ahead of time, and we set a limit to the developer, said, developer, you can receive no more than $100,000. Well, the tax increment that's available is $100,000 over the life of the district, and so you can only receive 85,000 because we're going to be withholding 15,000. So all that's determined on the front end, and then there are some controls on the back end that say if this didn't happen as we projected, then the formula corrects itself in the last few years of a TIF district.
because the question is there any way, is that going to come over the course of the subsidy, or can we get that up front so we got liquidity to go out and do some affordable housing on our own?
That would be on a case-by-case basis.
Okay, because I was saying if we're going to do that, it'd be nice then to have that liquidity available in the redevelopment fund that we can use for other things, other affordable housing, or I'm thinking more along the line, upgrading some of the less than quality affordable housing that's already here.
Mhm.
If that would be a good idea for some of that money.
Yeah, and Madam Chair and Commissioner, it gets more complicated with every project because the funding sources all differ so much. So for project A, we might say, developer, we'd like you to designate this money immediately because we can pay ourselves back and use it in a less in a more unfettered way with fewer strings attached to it. So a lot of it depends on what the subsidy is and how we can use the subsidy to either pay ourselves back for something or put into the housing redevelopment fund to use for admin. And it varies so much from project to project, but we will do our best with each project to explain the different ways that they could pay that to us and what the advantages and disadvantages of each would be from a financial standpoint.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Commissioner Sandal?
I had somewhat the same question, and I was just wanting to know, and you've already answered it for me, you know, what has been our ratio over a 3-year period, and I'm very comfortable with what you've done, because I've seen it over the last umpteen years. And I know sometimes the funding mechanism to buy a parcel kind of determines what kind of housing that's going to be, like your Habitat for Humanity and so on. And so I know that it's kind of built into the system. So I'm comfortable.
It is, I would say, looking at it, where the ratio fell below for the affordable was the years we had NSP dollars and we were focusing on rehabs. And so the market was so different then that to add new units was not helping our market at that point. Fixing those abandoned, foreclosed homes was where we needed to focus our efforts, where the money was directed. And so it did fall below there. And then the market was such that any new market rate we could get was, welcomed, so.
And Madam Chair, if something like that were to happen again, and we do try to be responsive to the market, we try with our programs to never compete with the market in a way that's going to be damaging to the local real estate market. And so, for example, if there were another, another recession or another case where the housing market was performing poorly, the last thing we'd want to do is throw inventory into the mix, into the system. And so we might then, there is a provision in the policy for exemptions. That might be a time where we come to you and say, we'd like an exemption from this for these reasons. And so, but that would be a decision you would make.
Commissioner Freeze Daniels?
I had a question about AMI. We throw in that term a lot. Can you talk about what area that encompasses? Is that just Richfield? Is that a certain subset? And how often is that updated?
It's annually.
Okay.
And it's the Twins, it's Hennepin County, isn't it, usually? Yeah. It's like Hennepin County. Yeah, it's Hennepin County. Okay. Sometimes it's called the Twin Cities. Sometimes there's no difference between the two. Sometimes it's the Twin Cities area median income. Yeah.
All right, we do not have the motion on the floor yet, so if someone would like to do that.
I'll make the motion to adopt the resolution approving the inclusionary affordable housing policy.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded multiple times. Is there any further discussion?
Yes, I have one. Are we going to send our stellar policy to the surrounding suburbs? Particularly one to the west of us? Who
They
never
actually have adopted their own recently, the city of Edina.
Yes.
Yes. So, and they're very different markets, so theirs looks different than ours does.
Their affordable houses are 400,000.
Yes, and they charge per unit, not created the in lieu fee, and it's substantial. Yeah, it
And
was not a
thus
number
the-
we felt.
Thus the boom in Edina stopped.
Yes, we do share the policy. We've been meeting regularly with this group of other communities, and we've all been sharing. So yes, we will put ours out there as well.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so all in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All right, we've adopted the inclusionary affordable housing policy. Moving on, we have HRA discussion items. Are there any items that anyone would like to bring up? All right, hearing none, we'll go on to the executive director's report.
Chair, supple members of the HRA, I really don't have a report this evening.
All right, this is going to be a very short meeting. Moving on to claims and payroll.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Are there any questions or clarifications? Hearing none, all in favor of approving claims and payroll, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
If I may, I think it might be interesting, given the fact that we have in waiting executive director, we should ad lib Mr. Stark and see how we can do on one just off the top of his head.
Oh, yeah. So do you have anything to add to the conversation?
Well, I would say we went before the Metropolitan Council last week 2 weeks ago, with our grant proposal, and it's kind of like defending your thesis in a little way. And maybe Julie can tell you a little bit about the money involved and what the money would be used for if the grant were successful. I felt good about the outcome, but we probably won't know for another week or two.
Sure, it was, Madam Chair, members of the HRA, it was for the Cedar Point 2 project. We applied for Livable Communities Act funds, and they put you through your paces. To get that money, we applied for $1.2 million to help with stormwater, to do the last couple of acquisitions. some of the sidewalk treatments, I think. I'm trying to remember now, but so a variety of things. And they are required to set aside a certain amount for suburban communities, so it doesn't just go to Minneapolis-St. Paul. And there were 4 suburban communities that are competing for funds. So, I mean, all good projects, I'm sure, but we felt like ours was certainly competitive with the rest. So we'll see. It's reviewed by a committee, and then makes the recommendation to the full Met Council. So I think they're making their decision in another week or 2.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Well, seeing no other business before us, the meeting stands adjourned. And we'll start the EDA meeting in about 2 minutes. Aaron needs to sign a bunch of stuff. There's another one here, but we gotta wait till the meeting happens before we do that.
Is it further down? Is it next, or do we have to go
I
someplace
think you
else?
have to clear it out and go to the next one.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Close current tab, and then it comes to
There
the
we go.
next one.
Okay.
You can say.
Well, that was a pretty good guess, 7:15, immediately following.
Yeah. Well, they think it'll never be shorter than that, but we could always try. All right, are we all set to go? All right, it is 7:21, and we are calling this meeting of the Economic Development Authority of Richfield to order. First off is approval of the minutes of the regular EDA meeting of August 20th, 2018.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Are there any clarifications or changes? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All right, we've approved the minutes. Next, the agenda.
I'll move approval.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the agenda. Any further discussion? All in favor of approving the agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All right, we've approved the agenda. All right, now we'll have a little deja vu. We have consideration of the adoption of a resolution approving an inclusionary affordable housing policy. Mr. Devich.
Thank you, President Supple and members of the EDA. Because Julie did such a great job at the last meeting describing this, I'm going to pass this off to Julie Urban.
Sure. So President Supple and members of the EDA, as we just went through in the HRA meeting, we are talking about an inclusionary affordable housing policy. I think it's the same policy as you just heard about, so I won't go back through the staff report, but just to say that, it's unknown at this time whether the EDA would ever provide the financial assistance for the construction of new housing at this point, but in the event that you would, and it would come up this way, it's in place and that you've formally adopted it. And so that's why we're asking you to consider it here this evening.
All right, is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
All right, any discussion?
I'm just curious, and I should know that, I was here when we set it up, but is there any sort of a situation with the EDA with the funding it has? What I'm working as much towards renovating less than quality affordable housing as opposed to putting money into brand new construction. I think they're both important, but I think we could do a better service to a large part of the community by figuring out a way to fund the renovations. I mean, new construction is great, but working on the affordable housing here that is less than quality seems to me it should be a goal for one of our commissions.
Sure. Well, and I think that President Supple and members of the EDA, that we do budget $100,000 in EDA funds for the apartment rehab program. So that was one of the primary receivers of funds.
Okay.
Yep. So
Yep.
it funds that, and it also funds our Kids at Home program. And while that's not rehabbing units, it's supporting folks in affordable rental housing in meaningful ways. So both of those, I would argue, are doing some of what you're talking about.
Mhm.
And
Yeah, I just, maybe I'm thinking more long-term, trying to keep our eyes open for ways to develop some of that additional funding and with a specific goal towards you know, whether it's incentives for the current landowners, owners of the property. But it just seems to me that our focus has been, you know, 20% of new construction, 15% if you're going to defer. But I'm trying to figure out what can we do to help out upgrade the current affordable housing that isn't where we want it to be.
So I mean, it's a lot of money
Oh, I
that's
know,
needed,
I-
and, you know, and I think that
But
we.
you got to start somewhere is all I'm
right.
thinking of. You know,
So,
I mean, we
yep.
think about seasons. You go through some of these 6, 8, 12-unit apartment buildings, and how
Right.
many of them have door locks that work? I mean, there's things that we can do to secure them more, and then just chip away a little bit here or there. Some of the things that they've done at Seasons weren't expensive, but they created an aura of security once you get in the buildings.
Right. And that's certainly stuff that we will continue to work on, and, you know, the money goes fast.
Yep.
This year, it paid for a new roof. It paid for a variety of improvements at another building. I think that we also continue to try to make our point at the state level and the county level to say we need some kind of funding mechanism. We're not going to get there with our levy, and we really need you, the state, to help us out here. And so we continue to try to send that message, and other communities send it as well. You know, it's an issue of dollars, but at some point, you know, there's got to be, we need to get more creative. And because, yeah, we need real funds. Our buildings are primarily over 50 years old.
Right. No, that's always what's been kind of in the back of my mind.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Mr. Devich?
So we'll continue.
Thank you, President Supple, members of the HRA. You know, it occurs to me that, you know, that 15% option, if somebody has to contribute that certainly could be looked at also as a source. So the money could go right back, you know, to fixing up current affordable housing, building it up, building the quality of it up.
Right.
You know, you never know, there might be a program that would come forth sometime in the future where perhaps state, county, somebody would provide funding for that if there were some kind of a match. And, you know, again, maybe if there was a situation like that, something like a 15%, that 15% money could be used as a matching thing to try to draw more funding. So
The other piece that the council had mentioned when we had our last work session this summer was to look at the 4D tax break, and is there a way to use that to leverage rehab? And so that's actually not quite next on the list of things to do, but it's out there. But I know there's a cost there in taxes, and it.
Yeah, I'm just thinking of the last time we did it, we kind of got leveraged.
No.
I'd maybe
You felt
sandbag,
that.
maybe a better word, but.
Mhm.
But it's viable, but I'd like to use it up front, not halfway through a project.
Mhm.
All right. So we have a motion before us to adopt a resolution approving an inclusionary affordable housing policy. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All right, we've passed the policy. Next, we have consideration of adoption of an amended version of the bylaws of the Richfield Economic Development Authority. Mr. Devich.
again, thank you, President Supple, members of the EDA. Since the EDA was established in 2017, I have been its executive director. And since I've announced my retirement effective November 30th, 2018, you know, we have to take a look at what happens after I leave. So looking at the Article 3, Section 8, we are looking at putting some changes in that are really fairly minor. And the first one would be an additional sentence stating that regardless who is appointed as executive director, that is of the EDA, the city manager of the city of Richfield shall have the ultimate authority in recommending the annual levy and budget. And I think that goes to the fact that the EDA, by virtue of having the same body as the HRA, and the EDA levy is actually rolled into the city levy, that the city manager have the final authority on that levy, just like the city recommendation, I should say, the final recommendation to the governing body, just the same as it would have been or continues to be for the city budget. And then second, a change in the language removing the requirement that an acting executive director as designated by the executive director must be the community development director. And then finally, a change in the wording to allow for the designation of a recording secretary. And those are three things that I think, are fairly minor, but would be very important, especially with my leaving after the end of next month, to keep this rolling ahead.
All right, do we have someone willing to make the motion?
Yeah, I would move to adopt an amended version of the bylaws of the Richfield Economic Development Authority.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All right, we've adopted the motion. All right, next is consideration of the appointment of a new executive director of the Economic Development Authority to serve following the retirement of current executive director Steve Devich. Mr. Devich.
Once again, thank you, President Supple, members of the EDA. Same situation since the inception in 2017. I have been the executive director, and while the term is not formally designated, the customary expires upon the election of officers at a regular meeting of the EDA each year. In the interim, there will be undoubtedly an EDA business to undertake, which will require the appointment of a new executive director. In the EDA's first year, the executive director position has been filled by the city manager of the city. That practice is not required by EDA bylaws, and many EDAs employ someone other than a city manager to be the of the associated city to be the executive director. The bylaws of the EDA state that the executive director shall have such term as the authority fixes. Given the state of transition of the city manager's office, staff is recommending that the EDA appoint Community Development Director John Stark as the executive director to serve out the remainder of 2018 following my retirement, and the entirety of 2019 until the first regular meeting in EDA in 2020. Again, the suggestion there is that it would provide, continuity for the EDA for the next, basically 13 months.
All right, thank you.
If I may,
All right, go ahead.
I will move that we appoint Community Development Director John Stark as Executive Director of the Richfield EDA following the retirement of the current Executive Director, Steve Devich, for a term lasting until the first regular meeting of the EDA in 2020.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion?
Does Mr. Stark want the position?
Nobody ever asked me that question. Of course I do. It's a pleasure to serve.
And thank you to Mr. Devich for your service as well.
Thank you.
All right, any further discussion? All right, all in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All right, we've appointed a new executive director. All right, moving on, EDA discussion items. I just would like to say it was really nice in Clemson payroll to see all of the kids at home subsidies to help stabilize kids, and so I thought that was a good use of the funds. So, any other items? All right, moving on, executive director's report.
President Supple, I don't have a report.
All right, now claims and payroll, we had 2 sets. I'll move acceptance or approval of both sets of claims and payroll.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Hearing no further business, we stand adjourned. Thank you.